I once read that the heart's magnetic field radiates up to 5 meters from the body, so that whenever we are within this range of another person, our hearts are interacting. The body's silent communications with other bodies are unmapped and mysterious, a linguistics of scent, colour, flushes of heat, the dilating of a pupil.
Hello, I'm Nick Klomp, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra, and it's my privilege to be interviewing Emily Bitto about her novel The Strays. The Strays is the UC Book of the Year for 2016. Emily, congratulations for starters.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about The Strays, the form, the shape, just in general, just for those people that are just beginning to read the book. What are you thinking?
So The Strays is a novel. It's set in Melbourne, mainly in the 1930s. It's about a group of artists, and it's kind of also about a friendship between a young girl, Lily, who is the narrator of the novel, and another young girl, Eva, who's the daughter of one of the artists. And it's kind of told, it starts off with Lily later in life, and she's kind of looking back on her childhood around this sort of group of very interesting bohemian kind of people who she absolutely kind of worshipped when she was young, and also looking back on her friendship with Eva in particular. Yeah.
Okay, so 1930s, that's a long time ago. What sort of inspired you to write a story around that era, and indeed this whole story?
Well, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to write about a sort of artist community. I'm really interested in the idea of people who sort of cut themselves off to some degree from mainstream society, whether that's kind of, you know, religious groups or artist communities or any kind of that sort of a you know, utopian community, I guess you might think of it as. And I think that's a really fascinating thing to write about in terms of the characters that are drawn to that sort of environment and the tensions and dynamics that sort of arise in that situation. So I knew I wanted to write about that, and I wanted to write about an artist community, but initially I wasn't quite sure what period I wanted to set it in. And I was sort of toying with maybe the 60s, because there were a lot of artist communities in that period as well. But in the end I did a lot of research, and the 30s really struck me as a very interesting time in Australian kind of art history, because modernism was just kind of starting to come to Australia from Europe. It was a very kind of new, exciting sort of time in the art world, and then coupled with that, the mainstream culture in Australia was very, very conservative. So there was this real kind of conflict between what artists were kind of doing in their creative life and then the kind of mainstream culture. And there was a lot of obscenity trials that happened at that time, and really kind of serious consequences, I guess, for artists, you know, who stood up for what they wanted to do, and who wanted to kind of embrace that new style of art. And, you know, I think that's something that really artists in the West, at least, don't really kind of face these days. There's very little kind of that's genuinely controversial these days. And so I guess I just sort of thought that would have been a fascinating time to be an artist, because, you know, there's this sense of genuine newness and daring, and a sense of kind of going against the sort of authority figures of the time, and a sense of real risk as well, I guess. Yeah.
Lily, the character Lily, also took lots of risks. What is it about the character that attracted you? Is there something in your childhood that, you know, did you aspire to join another family? Anything else like that? What was that about Lily that attracted you?
I mean, there are kind of, I guess, elements of my experience very, very dissimilar in a lot of ways to the actual literal happenings, but I kind of essentially grew up as an only child. I've got a younger half brother and sister, but they're a lot younger than me, and I didn't grow up with them. So I kind of had that feeling growing up that I drew on in Lily's character, of feeling very much an only child and wanting to be kind of part of a big sort of raucous, exciting, kind of rambunctious family. And I had a very close friend who was part of a big family, and I remember that feeling of kind of going to her house and just enjoying the sort of liveliness and chaos that went on there, and then going home and sort of having these very quiet dinners with my mum and stepdad, and sort of feeling the difference between that. But I guess also just, you know, in Lily's character, I wanted to explore that that idea of an outsider figure. And also I think the experience that a lot of people have around the age that the sort of main drama of the story happens, when she's about sort of 15, 16, where you start to kind of think about what it is you want out of your life and who your people are, and that is less and less your own kind of family, and you start to kind of think about who are the people that you want to belong to, not that you belong to just because you're born into that family. And I guess ultimately the desire to have an extraordinary life that I think a lot of us probably relate to.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Everyone, you'll have to read the novel, because what you described then actually is a lot like Lily's experience, sort of going home, cricket's in the background while she's eating dinner at her real home. Yeah. That's interesting. You've actually revealed quite a bit just there, Emily, just quietly. But anyway.
Turn the cameras up.
Yeah, that's right. What about the way you paint the descriptions of weather and the environment, and of course the beautiful art throughout the book? That gives me a hint that perhaps you wanted to be an artist yourself. Is there any sort of hidden visual artist within the creative writing artist?
Not really. I mean, language I think has always been my medium. I've always kind of expressed myself through language, but I don't know, I guess I think of language as a visual medium in some ways, even though ultimately it's not in the same way that painting is. But I actually started out writing poetry predominantly, and when you write poetry, I think you really think about the visual aspects and you think about images a lot, and so maybe that's just the way I've kind of developed as a writer, to really think in a sort of visual way. I mean, I love visual art, but I've never been that good at it myself.
Yeah. The title of the book is The Strays, and for me a lot of the book is about that tension between the envy and the desire to belong to a different group, in this case of a bohemian family, but the knowledge that you're sort of always on the outside of that, and just being reminded of that occasionally, even though you perhaps were sort of intoxicated and even tricked yourself into believing that you were part of it occasionally. So that tension between envy and belonging across what otherwise is a brilliant friendship between two young women. How did that play out in your mind? You obviously played on that. Was that an idea right from the start? How does that figure within the book, do you think? Yeah,
I mean, one of the things I knew right from the start before I even started writing the novel was that I wanted to write what I kind of think to myself as an outsider novel, and other novels I guess that I would classify as that would be things like Donna Tartt's The Secret Histories. I don't know if you've read that, but it's very much along those lines. Things like Brideshead Revisited. There's a novel by a guy called Alan Hollinghurst called The Line of Beauty.
Oh, I've read that as well. Yeah.
And they're all novels that I love, and something that I love about them is that kind of tension, again, between the sort of outsider figure and the group of some kind that they really want to kind of belong to. And I actually can't remember whether they're all written from the first person perspective, but I was really interested in exploring that as well, because through kind of inhabiting Lily's character as an outsider from her perspective, it kind of introduces another element that I felt like I could really play with, which is that she, like you pointed out, she does kind of partly envy as well as completely idealise Eva and her family, and so, because she's the narrator, but she's also a character within the book, I kind of hope to encourage people to, I guess, question her as the narrator and where she's coming from, and to think about what are her motives in terms of how she remembers the past and how she kind of thinks about her own role in what happened, and, to kind of think about how we all kind of look at the way that we construct our own life stories for ourselves, and then when they come up against other people's recollections of the past, how we adjust that, I guess. So it's kind of, it introduces an extra element for me, I guess.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Meanwhile, most of the themes explored in the book are certainly themes viewed through Lily's eyes, as you said, and of course Eva and Eva's sisters. So that was a lot of action going on through the eyes of adolescent women, adolescent girls, if you like. So you must have been conscious of that when you were writing the book.
Mm.
This book, I think, will appeal to everyone across the population, not just adolescent girls. So how did you deal with that? Were you conscious of the fact that there'll be many readers? I know the vast majority, male and female students and staff of our university, are going to love the book. Now, how do you deal with that when you're developing relationships and themes for a certain demographic, but clearly you're trying to appeal to a wider readership than that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I was really keen to write about friendship. And, I guess the specific friendships I was writing about were those between young girls, but I think it could have equally been between young boys, or, just young people in general. And I think the main thing that I really wanted to think about was just how important those early friendships are, and kind of, I guess, give them their weight in literature. Because when I sort of look around at a lot of the books that I've loved, or even other forms of popular culture, films and TV shows and stuff, I kind of get really frustrated that friendship doesn't get sort of given the level of importance that romance. It always is trumped by romance. And and that's something that has been really nice in the feedback I've got from this book, is that people have kind of said how much they enjoyed reading about how important friendship is, and that their friendships that they had when they were younger, or that they even still have actually been as important in their lives as their relationships between them and their families, or their husbands or wives or children. And that's kind of something that I feel like everyone can kind of relate to that, whether you're in that period in your life, or close to that period, or looking back at those kind of friendships.
That's the other thing. You've caught a whole lot of other demographic in the community, in that it's Lily looking back and thinking about that, and then the reunion many years later. So was that a conscious thing? Let me think about this. Let me capture a wider readership, because I think it worked brilliantly. I don't think that it was contrived at all. What were you thinking about that as you wrote it?
No, I mean, not in that way at all.
Yeah.
I think it was very kind of unconscious, that process. But I am kind of interested, as I sort of touched on that idea of memory, and the way that we look back on our lives and constantly kind of revise, in a way, our own stories to ourselves, and kind of, even in isolation, the way that we think about our past changes as we get older. But then if we are forced to confront someone else's perspective on the same events, that can also force us to kind of change our ideas. So, I guess it just sort of naturally developed through wanting to think about those kind of ideas.
Good one. And meanwhile, a lot of our students will be particularly interested. You wrote this novel as part of your PhD studies. How did that relationship between the PhD and your creative writing go? Well, a lot of people are thinking, I've got a novel in me. Give us some background. How did that go with all your studies?
Yeah, so I actually did a master's in literature first, and I was kind of going down that path, and then I decided I wanted to write a novel. So I enrolled in the creative writing PhD, and that, I feel like that was really helpful for me, because it kind of gave me a structure. I'm someone that gets very caught up in ideas, and really excited about them for a while, and then once they get a little bit hard, I might suddenly see another idea as much more exciting.
Sure.
Which I think is pretty common. And I think having that PhD structure meant that once I got past a certain point, I couldn't really change my mind. I had to stick with the project and make it work, and that was really good for me. I don't know if I would have actually finished it otherwise. But there was also a research component that went alongside the creative, and in that I looked at the way that artist characters are represented in contemporary fiction. And so that kind of brought in another whole sort of more academic level of thinking about, what it is to be a creative person, and the kind of myths around that. But as we have kind of talked a little bit about off camera, I tried to sort of not let that influence the writing too much, because I think, you don't want a novel to be a political
PhD thesis.
tract or a PhD thesis. So I actually ended up writing the first draft of the novel before I got too much into the research, so that it wouldn't end up just an attempt to illustrate the
Yes,
the
sure.
points that I'd found in the research.
Okay, so PhD behind you, a writing career ahead of you. Have you got another novel or 10 in you? What's the state of play now for the next novel?
The state of play now is I'm really just kind of starting to get started on the next novel, which is quite daunting. There's a sort of common phrase in the writing world of the second novel syndrome.
Yes, that's right. Yes, don't they say that it's never as good as the first?
Yeah, that's
See,
right.
that's a bummer when it comes to doing a really good first novel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to make a better second novel then.
Yes,
Come
thanks
on.
for pointing that out.
Sorry about that. You can do it. You can do it.
Yeah,
How long?
hopefully.
How long?
Well, I mean, I think I wrote the first draft of the Strays in about a year and a half, but I also was kind of doing
Your
I had
PhD?
to go through the confirmation process of the PhD, so I don't know. I'm now running a bar at the same time, so maybe it'll be about the same, hopefully.
A year and a half from now. Emily Bitto, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.